Ethan Carter sat behind the counter of a small clothing store in downtown Austin, watching the evening light fade into a soft orange glow outside the glass windows. It had been a quiet day, like most days lately. A few regulars had stopped by, a couple of tourists had browsed without buying anything, and now the store was nearly empty. The hum of the air conditioner and the faint music playing in the background were the only sounds keeping him company. He leaned back his chair, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, but his mind wasn't really there. It drifted, as it often did. The thoughts he didn't like to linger on for too long, how routine his life had become, how predictable everything felt, and how, despite being surrounded by people every day, he still felt alone. The soft chime of the doorbell pulled him out of his thoughts. Ethan looked up. A young man had just stepped inside. For a brief second, the world felt like it had slowed down. The guy looked to be in his early 20s, maybe 24. He had an effortless kind of confidence, not loud or attention-seeking, just natural. His dark hair was slightly messy, like he hadn't tried too hard to fix it, and he wore a simple outfit that somehow still looked good on him. Ethan straightened up a little without realizing it. "Hey," the guy said casually, glancing around the store. "I'm looking for a t-shirt." "Yeah, sure," Ethan replied, quickly setting his phone aside and stepping out from behind the counter. "What kind are you thinking? Something casual? Fitted?" "Something simple," the guy said, his voice calm, but good quality. Ethan nodded. "Got it." He walked over one of the racks and started flipping through a few options, but he was more aware of the guy's presence than usual. There was something about him, something Ethan couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the way he carried himself. Maybe it was the quiet confidence. Or maybe it was just him. Ethan pulled out a few shirts and turned back. "These are pretty popular. Good fit, soft fabric." The guy stepped closer, looking through them. His fingers brushed against one, a navy blue fitted t-shirt. He paused. "This one," he said. Ethan noticed a slight change in his expression. "Good choice. That one's one of my favorites." The guy gave a small smile, like he appreciated the confirmation, but didn't want to show too much. "Yeah, it looks nice. You should try it on," Ethan said, almost automatically. The guy hesitated. It wasn't a big reaction, just a slight pause, a flicker of uncertainty. But Ethan caught it. "I can mean if you want," Ethan added quickly. "There's a fitting area in the back." The guy glanced toward the back of the store, then back at Ethan. For a moment, it seemed like he might say no. "I'm good," he said at first. "I can probably tell the size." Ethan shrugged lightly, trying to keep things casual. "Fair enough, but it'll fit better if you check. Saves you the trouble of coming back." Another pause. Then the guy let out a quiet breath and nodded. "All right, I'll try it." Ethan gestured toward the back. Through there, as the guy walked past him, Ethan felt a strange awareness, like his senses had sharpened. He told himself not to overthink it. It was just a customer, just a normal moment. But it didn't feel normal. The curtain to the fitting area shifted slightly as the guy stepped inside. Ethan stayed near the racks, pretending to organize shirts that were already neatly arranged. His attention kept drifting toward the back. He wasn't sure why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something else. After a minute or two, the curtain moved again. The guy stepped out wearing the navy blue shirt. For a second, Ethan forgot what he was about to say. It fit him perfectly. The fabric hugged just enough to highlight his build without being too tight. It was simple, clean, and somehow it made him stand out even more. Ethan let out a small, impressed breath before he could stop himself. "Yeah, that looks really good on you." The guy looked down at himself, adjusting the sleeve slightly. "You think so?" "Definitely," Ethan said more confidently now. "That's your size." The guy looked back up at him, and this time his smile was a little more visible. "All right, I'll take it." Ethan nodded, trying not to seem too pleased. "Good call." They walked back to the counter together. Ethan rang up the purchase, but instead of the usual quick transaction, neither of them seemed in a hurry. "So you live around here?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone casual. "Yeah," the guy said, "not too far." "Nice." A small silence followed, but it wasn't awkward. It felt easy. "I'm Ethan, by the way," he said. Daniel, the guy replied. Ethan repeated it slightly, as if testing how it felt to say, Daniel. Yeah. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel glanced at the receipt, then back at Ethan. You always this quiet? He asked lightly. Ethan smirked. Only on slow days. Daniel gave a soft chuckle. Fair enough. Ethan handed him the bag, but as Daniel reached for it, their fingers brushed just briefly. It was nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. Daniel seemed to notice it too, just for a second, before pulling his hand back. Thanks, he said. Yeah, any time. Daniel turned to leave, then paused near the door. He looked back over his shoulder. Hey, you got Instagram or something? Ethan blinked, slightly surprised. Yeah. Give it to me, Daniel said, casual but direct. Ethan grabbed a small card, scribbled his handle on the back, and handed it over. Daniel glanced at it, nodded, and slipped it into his pocket. I'll text you. And just like that, he walked out. The doorbell chimed again. Ethan stood there for a moment, staring at the door long after it had closed. The store was quiet again. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Ethan didn't text Daniel right away. He told himself there was no rush. People exchange contact details all the time. It didn't have to mean anything. Still, his mind kept drifting back to that evening. The way Daniel had smiled, the ease in his voice, the strange sense of familiarity that had settled between them so quickly. 2 days passed. On the third night, after closing the shop and sitting alone in his apartment with nothing but silence and the glow of his phone, Ethan finally gave in. He opened Instagram, stared at Daniel's profile for a moment, then typed a simple message. Hey, it's Ethan from the store. He almost didn't send it, but he did. The reply came faster than he expected. Hey, took you long enough. Ethan smiled without realizing it. From there, it became easy. At first, their conversations were light. Small jokes, casual check-ins, random thoughts shared late at night. But slowly, without either of them forcing it, the conversations deepened. They started talking about their routines, their work, the things they liked and didn't like. Daniel told him about his job, the way he wanted more out of life, but wasn't sure how to get there. Ethan found himself opening up too, about his store, the struggles of running it, the quiet loneliness that came with doing everything on his own. There was something about Daniel that made it feel safe to talk. Days turned into a rhythm. Messages in the morning, conversations throughout the day, long chats at night that stretched further than either of them planned. Eventually, texting didn't feel like enough. They met for coffee first. It was supposed to be casual, just a quick meetup, but it lasted for hours. They talked about everything and nothing at the same time, laughing more than Ethan expected to. After that, meeting up became natural. They walked through the city in the evenings, sometimes without a destination. They sat in quiet parks, sharing music through one pair of earphones. They found comfort in each other's presence, even in silence. There were small moments that started to matter more than they should. The way Daniel would stand just a little closer than necessary. The way Ethan noticed every small detail about him. The way he spoke, the way he reacted, the way his mood shifted. Sometimes their hands would brush accidentally. Sometimes they wouldn't pull away immediately. Neither of them said anything about it, but both of them felt it. Ethan began to realize that what he felt wasn't just friendship. It was something deeper, something that made him both excited and nervous at the same time. He had never rushed into anything like this before, and now that it was happening, he wasn't sure what to do with it. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed more at ease, but there were moments when his expression would change, when he would go quiet for no clear reason, as if something inside him was holding back. One evening, after they had spent hours just talking in Ethan's shop after closing time, Daniel leaned back against the counter and looked at him. You ever feel like something's changing, he said, but you don't know what to call it yet? Ethan hesitated. Yeah, he admitted. Daniel held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, a faint smile on his lips. Yeah, same. That conversation stayed with Ethan. A few days later, Daniel invited him over for dinner. Nothing big, he said. Just come over. Ethan tried to act normal about it, but he felt nervous in a way he couldn't explain. It felt like a step forward, something more personal, more real. When he arrived, Daniel opened the door almost immediately, like he had been waiting. For a second, they just stood there. Then Daniel stepped forward and pulled him into a quick hug. It was brief, but it lingered. "Come in," Daniel said, a little more softly than usual. Inside, the house felt warm and welcoming. Ethan met Daniel's parents during dinner. They were kind, polite, and completely unaware of the quiet tension beneath the surface. Ethan did his best to stay composed, to act like everything was normal, even though every glance between him and Daniel carried something unspoken. Dinner passed with light conversation, but Ethan's attention kept drifting back to Daniel. Afterward, Daniel led him to his room. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. It was quieter there, more private. The noise of the outside world faded, leaving just the two of them in a space that suddenly felt too small for everything they were holding inside. They sat down, talking at first like they always did, but slower now, more careful. There were pauses, moments where neither of them spoke, but neither of them looked away either. Ethan felt his heart beating faster. He wasn't sure when things had changed, but they had. "I like spending time with you," Daniel said suddenly. Ethan swallowed slightly. "Yeah, me too." Another silence, this one heavier. Ethan hesitated, then spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel nodded, though he looked a little tense. Ethan didn't overthink it this time. "Can I have a moment?" he said, not fully explaining, but hoping Daniel would understand. Daniel did understand. That was the problem. He looked away, running a hand through his hair. For a second, it seemed like he might say no. "I don't know," Daniel said under his breath. Ethan immediately felt a wave of regret. "It's okay. Forget it. I didn't mean to." "No," Daniel interrupted gently. "It's not that." He paused, then looked back at Ethan. There was conflict in his eyes, but also something else, something real. After a long moment, he nodded slightly. "Okay." That was all Ethan needed. He moved closer, slowly, giving Daniel enough time to pull away if he wanted to. But he didn't. Their first kiss was soft, careful, almost hesitant. It wasn't about intensity. It was about feeling, about everything they hadn't said finally finding a way out. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. There was no confusion, no fear, just a quiet certainty that this meant something. When they pulled back, neither of them spoke immediately. They didn't need to, because both of them knew. Things were no longer the same. For a while after that night, everything felt different, lighter, but also more uncertain. Ethan would catch himself smiling for no reason during the day, replaying small moments in his head. The way Daniel had looked at him, the quiet closeness they had shared. It stayed with him. At the same time, there was a new kind of nervousness beneath it all. This wasn't simple anymore. Daniel felt it too. At first, they didn't talk much about what had happened. Their conversations continued, but there was a shift, something unspoken sitting between every word. When they met, there was still warmth, still connection, but also hesitation. They were more aware of each other now, more careful. Sometimes that made things feel even more intense. Other times, it made things complicated. Ethan wanted clarity, but he didn't want to push too hard. He had started to care more than he expected, and the thought of losing whatever they had built made him hold back. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed torn. There were moments when he was completely present, laughing, relaxed, the same as before. But then there were moments when he would go quiet, his mind somewhere else, his expression distant. One evening, while they were sitting in Ethan's shop after closing, Ethan finally spoke up. "Did things change for you?" he asked carefully. Daniel didn't answer right away. He leaned against the counter, staring down at his hands. "I don't know," he said after a pause. "I mean, yeah, but not in a bad way." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then what is it?" Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It's just complicated." That word lingered. Ethan tried not to let it bother him, but it did. Complicated usually meant something was wrong. Over the next few days, the distance between them became more noticeable. Not drastic, but enough for Ethan to feel it. Messages became shorter. Replies came later than usual. Plans were postponed or kept vague. Ethan told himself not to overthink it, but he did. Meanwhile, Daniel was dealing with something he hadn't fully shared. At home, things felt different. His father had started asking small questions. Nothing direct, nothing obvious, but enough to make Daniel uneasy. It wasn't about Ethan specifically, but about where he spent his time, who he was with, why he seemed distracted lately. Daniel brushed it off, but the pressure was there. It sat quietly in the background, growing. One night, despite everything, Ethan came over again. At first, it felt like before, familiar, comfortable. They talked, laughed a little, tried to ignore the tension that had been building between them. But when they went to Daniel's room, the silence returned. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Ethan looked at him, trying to read his expression. "You've been distant." Daniel sighed softly. "I know. Did I do something?" "No," Daniel said quickly. "It's not you." "Then what is it?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He sat down on the edge of the bed, leaning forward, his hands clasped together. "I just don't know how to deal with this," he admitted. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. "Deal with what?" "With us." The word hung in the air. Ethan stepped closer. "We don't have to figure everything out right now." Daniel looked up at him, his expression conflicted. "That's the problem. It's not just about us." Before Ethan could respond, there was a sudden knock at the door. Both of them froze. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to break the moment completely. Daniel's expression changed instantly. "Yeah," he called out, trying to sound normal. The door opened slightly. His father stood there. For a brief second, no one moved. His father's eyes shifted between them, taking in the scene, noticing the tension, the closeness, the way neither of them seemed relaxed. Nothing obvious was happening, but something was clearly there. "You guys okay?" His father asked, his tone neutral, but his gaze sharp. "Yeah," Daniel replied quickly. "We're just talking." There was a pause. His father nodded slowly, though his expression didn't fully soften. "All right." He closed the door. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. Ethan stepped back slightly, his heart still racing. Daniel ran a hand over his face, exhaling deeply. "This is what I mean." Ethan didn't know what to say. The moment had shattered something fragile between them. "I should go," Ethan said quietly. Daniel looked up like he wanted to stop him, but didn't. "Yeah, maybe that's better." That hurt more than Ethan expected. He nodded, forcing himself to stay composed. "All right." As he left, he felt the distance between them more clearly than ever. Not physical distance. Something deeper. Something harder to fix. The next few days passed in silence. No messages. No calls. Ethan tried to focus on work, but everything reminded him of Daniel. The shop felt emptier, the days longer. He replayed their last conversation over and over, wondering what he could have done differently. Daniel, meanwhile, struggled in his own way. At home, the tension hadn't disappeared. His father didn't say anything directly, but his behavior had changed, more observant, more questioning. It made Daniel feel like he was being watched, like any mistake could lead to something he wasn't ready to face. And in the middle of all that, there was Ethan, someone he didn't want to lose, but also someone he didn't know how to hold on to, without risking everything else. The silence between them stretched longer than either of them expected, and with each passing day, doubt grew stronger. Ethan started to wonder if maybe he had misunderstood everything, if maybe what they had wasn't as real as it felt. Daniel started to wonder if pushing Ethan away was the only way to protect both of them. Neither of them wanted it to end like this, but neither of them knew how to fix it. And so, for the first time since they met, they stayed apart. The silence stretched longer than either of them expected. At first, Ethan told himself it was temporary, that Daniel just needed space, that things would settle on their own. But days passed, and the quiet only grew heavier. The shop felt different now. Every time the doorbell rang, a small part of him hoped it would be Daniel walking in again like nothing had changed. It never was. He threw himself into work, staying late, reorganizing racks that didn't need organizing, keeping his hands busy so his mind wouldn't drift back to the same thoughts. But it always did. The navy blue shirt, the late-night conversations, That first quiet moment when everything shifted, it all stayed with him. Daniel wasn't doing much better. At home, the tension hadn't disappeared. It had just become quieter, harder to ignore. His father didn't bring anything up directly, but there was a watchfulness now, a subtle distance that hadn't been there before. It made Daniel feel like he was living in between two versions of himself, one that felt real and one that felt expected. He tried to focus on normal life, on routine, on distractions. None of it worked, because no matter what he did, his thoughts kept circling back to Ethan, to the way things had felt when they were together, to the way he had walked away without fixing anything. One evening, after another long day of pretending everything was fine, Daniel sat alone in his room, staring at his phone. Ethan's name was still there, their old messages untouched, frozen in time. He read through them slowly. The jokes, the late-night conversations, the moments that had seemed small at the time, but now felt important. He realized something then. Avoiding the situation hadn't protected anything. It had just made him lose something that mattered. Before he could overthink it, he stood up, grabbed his keys, and left. The drive felt longer than usual, even though he knew the way by heart. His grip on the steering wheel tightened and loosened again as his thoughts raced. What if Ethan didn't want to see him? What if it was too late? But beneath all that doubt, one thing was clear. He had to try. When Daniel reached the shop, the lights were still on. Ethan was inside. For a moment, Daniel just stood outside the door, watching through the glass. Ethan was behind the counter, focused on something, unaware that he was being watched. It looked exactly like the first day they met. Same place, same person, but everything felt different now. Daniel took a breath and pushed the door open. The bell rang. Ethan looked up. For a second, neither of them moved. Surprise flickered across Ethan's face, followed quickly by something more guarded. "Hey," Daniel said, his voice quieter than usual. Ethan straightened slightly. "Hey." The word felt unfamiliar now, like too much time had passed between something that used to be easy. Daniel stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. "Can we talk?" Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to protect himself, to keep that distance in place. But another part, the stronger part, had been waiting for this. "Yeah," he said finally. There was a pause before either of them knew where to begin. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I messed up." Ethan didn't respond right away, but his expression softened just slightly. "I shouldn't have just disappeared like that," Daniel continued. "I didn't know how to deal with everything, so I avoided it, and that wasn't fair to you." Ethan looked down briefly, then back at him. It didn't feel great. "I know," Daniel said quietly, "and I'm sorry." The sincerity in his voice made it hard for Ethan to stay distant. "It wasn't just about you," Daniel went on. "It was everything. My family, the pressure, not knowing what to do. But none of that changes the fact that I care about you." That made Ethan pause. "Then why push me away?" he asked. Daniel met his eyes, this time without looking away. "Because I was scared." The honesty in that answer settled something between them. Ethan stepped a little closer. "And now," Daniel didn't hesitate this time. "I'm still scared," he admitted. "But I don't want to lose you because of it." The words hung in the air. Simple. Real. Ethan felt the weight of everything he had been holding on to. The confusion, the hurt, the hope that never really went away. "You hurt me," he said, not harshly, just honestly. "I know, and I don't want to feel like that again." "You won't," Daniel said. Then more softly, "Or at least, I'll do everything I can to make sure you don't." Ethan studied him for a moment, searching for doubt, for hesitation. He didn't find it. "What are we doing?" Ethan asked. Daniel took a small step forward. "We figured out." That's not really an answer. A faint smile touched Daniel's lips. "It's the only honest one I've got." Ethan let out a quiet breath, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. For the first time in days, things didn't feel broken. They felt possible. "You're really here," Ethan said, almost like he needed to confirm it. "Yeah," Daniel replied. "I am." Another small silence settled between them, but this one wasn't heavy. It was steady. Ethan closed the distance between them, not rushing, giving Daniel time to step back if he wanted to. He didn't. When they finally hugged, it wasn't brief like before. It lasted, not because they were unsure, but because they weren't. There were still challenges ahead, conversations that hadn't happened yet, fears that wouldn't disappear overnight. But for now, they had made a choice. Not to run, not to hide, but to stay. A little while later, they pulled apart, both of them quieter, calmer. Daniel glanced around the shop, then back at Ethan. You know, this place kind of started everything. Ethan smiled slightly. Yeah, it did. Daniel took a step back toward the racks, running his hand along the fabric of his shirt before looking at Ethan again. So what now? Ethan leaned against a counter, considering that for a moment. Now, he said, we take it one step at a time. Daniel nodded. I can do that. The door remained closed this time. No interruptions. No sudden endings. Just a quiet understanding of two people who had found something real and decided it was worth holding on to. And as they stood there, in the same place where it had all begun, one thing felt certain. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of something honest,